Awesome. All right, so thank y'all so much for coming. My name is Brett. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Farm Bill community organizer with Slow Food USA. And yeah, tonight we're basically just going to be kind of going over the Farm Bill and talking about how it can be impacted by you all and what it's doing in the Ohio region. So yeah, I'm going to pass it to Mark Anthony to talk about your role.
Great. So I'm Mark Anthony. Thank you for including us in this conversation and for taking the time out to introduce and talk about the Farm Bill to us or with us. So I'm Mark Anthony Arsenio. I am the current chapter leader of Slow Food Columbus. And as you can see on the screen, we're just a chapter of, I think we've got 4 or 5 chapters here in Ohio. So we focus on the Central Ohio region. And so our overall mission is seeking to create dramatic and lasting change toward a more sustainable food system. And so the way that we like to approach it also here in this area is to really look at slow food friendly. So we're recognizing that good, clean, and fair is the ideal, but we're also excited to highlight and work with partners to try and get at some, if not all of those pieces. In particular, our chapter is really focused on accessibility, so trying to increase access to the organization, especially drawing in from folks who traditionally may not have necessarily been part of slow food or heard of it, and especially college-age students and younger folks, trying to bring them into the conversation. We're also interested in working on visibility and encouraging new members, especially using social media platforms. And then especially with the recent release over the last few years for Slow Food USA's EIJ manifesto, trying to really work on equity, inclusion, and justice in our chapter. So I know we've got Brandy, who's also on our board as well, and hopefully we'll get some input from the Columbus folks as well. But thanks again for having us here.
Pass it over, I believe, to Maddie.
Hi, thanks, Brett, and all of our friends at Slow Food. I'm Maddie Chera. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the director of the Greater Cincinnati Regional Food Policy Council. We're an initiative of Green Umbrella, which is sort of our parent organization. It's a nonprofit that serves as a sustainability alliance for the region of Greater Cincinnati, which some of you might already know this, but Greater Cincinnati includes parts of Southwest Ohio, Southeastern Indiana, and Northern Kentucky. So I know we have at least one Kentucky person on the call, our good friend Rosie. So we do have that regional perspective. And our Food Policy Council is a cross-sector collaboration. We have organizations and individuals, regular citizens who are involved, as well as people who work on food professionally. And we work together to drive impact through advocacy and coordinated action. I'm here today, but also we have Amanda Lucas, who's our Community Connections Coordinator, and that's our contact info if you need either of us. Amanda's going to speak in a minute, but before I say a few more things, I just wanted to also acknowledge one of our teammates who really was the catalyst for us getting together with Slow Food, Cynthia Walters, who wasn't able to join us, but she's been involved in Slow Food, I think Slow Food USA and maybe even international for a very long time. So we're really excited that Cynthia was able to connect us with Slow Food USA and now with Slow Food Columbus. So we can go to the next slide, Brett. And our vision as a Food Policy Council is a resilient regional food system. So we really have a comprehensive definition of resilience. We're looking at social, environmental, and economic resilience. And I think there's a lot of resonance with the slow food approach in that vision. How we work is we build networks across the region and across the food system. Like I said, we're really work across sector. We build capacity, so we share resources like today's session and provide technical assistance, sometimes distribute funding. We amplify stories, so we try to communicate out like good news and also stories about people's experiences and the needs of our communities. And we work together to advocate for changing policies. We are a Food Policy Council, so we really try to look at policies from the institutional level all the way up to the national and maybe even international someday level. And so that's perfect fit for our topic of discussion today with the Farm Bill. So you can go to the next slide, Brett. So last year we did some strategic planning and decided to sort of reassess or recategorize some of our different projects and areas of work. And we aligned with one of our statewide partners, which is the Ohio Food Policy Network, and decided to adopt their policy priority areas. So just to give you kind of a sense of the breadth of the food system and food issues that we work on, we try to address farms and land use issues, access and education issues, infrastructure, which is all the supply chain stuff, and that could even include technological and social infrastructure, and institutions. So those are the big purchasers like schools, hospitals, different companies, and government agencies and things like that, who have a pretty big footprint and impact on our food system. So that's a little bit about us. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Amanda, who's going to speak a bit more about our topic of today, the Farm Bill and how it relates to our region.
Alrighty. Can everybody hear me? Hopefully I'm off mute. Hi, my name is Amanda. And as Maddie mentioned, I am the Community Connections Coordinator for Greater Cincinnati Regional Food Policy Council. I will warn you that I say "our" a lot and "we" a lot in the next 7 to 10 minutes. And what I mean by "our" and "we" is the Food Policy Council and the 10-county region we represent. So just to be aware what that means. So it also, another disclaimer, in the next few slides, I list some USDA programs and jargon. But we don't have a time to like deep dive into each program and definition. So I think we have a question and answer session part of this presentation. So feel free to write your questions down and we can provide clarity later. So when the Food Policy Council were setting our priorities for the Farm Bill, we were aware of 2 things. One, we didn't want to reinvent the wheel when we have partners and other organizations in our area who have created platforms that create a clear vision of a farm bill that moves us to a more resilient regional food system. And 2, the Food Policy Council lens is unique because we can provide a perspective on how a federal package like the Farm Bill impacts a regional area like ours. So that's why our first priority listed on this slide is to inform and educate individuals, organizations, and other stakeholders about the regional impact of federal legislation like the Farm Bill. We do this by organizing with our council and committee members, developing resources and informational tools, and then also helping host webinars like this one. So when individuals hear about a federal package passing into law, I think a common question could be, how does it affect me at the state or city level? And we hope as the Food Policy Council, we can try to help answer that question. Next slide, please. So there's a lot to unpack from the Farm Bill, and I think Brett's going to do a great job of providing a 101. But it has 12 titles, and we would be here all day if we tried to tackle everything. So instead, the Food Policy Council advocacy emphasizes the existing and suggested programs that are either managed at the regional level or impact more directly the regional level. So another disclaimer, the Food Policy Council is not a lobbyist organization. We are not calling necessarily for specific legislation, but rather spotlighting opportunities for improvements within our regional agriculture system. So some of those opportunities for spotlight are existing USDA programs that have a regional focus. And that includes the Regional Food Business Centers program and grant. So with this program, the USDA prioritizes particular regions like Appalachia, which supports the food systems in the northeast and southeast of us in Cincinnati. Another example is the Local Agriculture Market Program, or LAMP for short. What's cool about LAMP is it also funds the farmers market promotion program, which helps farmers markets strengthen their operations and outreach. And that is a big priority for a lot of our partners in the greater Cincinnati region. The next example is the Regional Food System Partnership Program and Grant. The Food Policy Council actually was a recipient of this grant, which allowed us to help community organizations we work with strengthen their local buyers club, establish more CSA pickups, and even conduct research to improve local food market systems, such as the farmers market system in Southwest Ohio. Another example of something that is existing that has a regional focus is the Senior Farmers Market Nutrition Program in both Kentucky and Ohio, the Ohio Produce Perks Nutrition Incentive Program, and the Kentucky Double Dollars Program, and that directly impacts our region. They are all examples of nutrition incentive programs that like help the individuals most in need. Sorry. And finally, local meat processing could be expanded in our region. This expansion would increase accessibility in production and sales for smaller livestock farmers. This also means more local products available to the consumer, which would be great. So all of these existing programs are supported by data when we say they can strengthen the regional food system. The programs support operations of smaller to medium-sized farmers and increase accessibility of local and regional foods for the consumer. There's also suggested or recommended programs from this round of reauthorization of the Farm Bill that can be advocated for as well. So can we go to the next slide? So something to note, the majority of these programs do not exist in any form under the umbrella of the USDA. So these are kind of new programs. These new programs have been introduced to Congress as recommendations during the 2023 Farm Bill reauthorization process by other agriculture and food system organizations, for example, like NSAC, which I know Slow Food USA has somewhat of a relationship with, right? So some of these new or suggested programs include, there's an opportunity for the USDA to partner with local and state organizations to increase the amount of translated farming opportunities and training outreach material. That's a bit of a mouthful. This helps with accessibility to culturally relevant food by providing technical support and resources to immigrant farmers who may not speak English, or English might not be their first language. Another thing is that the USDA could establish a state or regionally run navigator program. This program could support beginning BIPOC and or smaller farmers in accessing land, regenerative and conservation research and its best practices, credit and funding opportunities, and training resources. So the next recommendation I mentioned isn't necessarily directly regional, but is reflective of our region. Our 10-county region has a robust agriculture system that includes many smaller to medium-sized farms that could benefit from targeted USDA support through an office for smaller farms. And finally, there is an opportunity to be more inclusive of smaller farms and food hubs like farmers markets when organizing state-level domestic emergency food procurement. Even times of emergency, individuals should have access to fresh fruits and vegetables. Fresh fruits and vegetables is all concentrated in one area, somewhere like a farmer's market. So if farmers markets were utilized, it can decrease the supposed burden associated with procuring locally, because a lot of times locally you have to shop multiple places. So what's cool about all of these suggested programs, like the ones on this slide, could have a focus on regional food, where smaller farms are the bedrock of the system. Implementing these suggestions would strengthen regional resiliency while supporting the smaller producer and the consumers alike. So I will hand over I'm done with my portion, and I'll hand over the mic to Brett.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amanda and Maddie. It's so awesome the work that y'all are doing. So like Amanda said, this is a huge bill. We could be here all day and still barely scratch the surface. But I'm going to try my best to do a really brief overview of the Farm Bill and just give y'all some insight, and then we'll have time not just for questions, but also feedback so that our organizations can hear from you all about what things you want to see amplified in our Farm Bill advocacy. So to start, I always want to preface with how structural the racism within our food system is. The Farm Bill has never addressed this, but that doesn't mean that it can't. And in fact, there are some marker bills already that are hoping to address that. But the reality is that in the United States, our food system is built on land stolen from indigenous people and then cultivated by enslaved African people. So this is an ancient history. We still see extreme racism in the way that the USDA provides grants to folks, the way that farmers receive resources, and the way that we talk about food. So I'll get into a little bit later what it actually looks like to utilize a racial equity lens when looking at the Farm Bill, but we always want to be considering that since it really has never been addressed in our Farm Bill. So why do we have a Farm Bill? Originally, the Farm Bill was 3 separate bills that was part of the 1930s New Deal legislation from President Franklin D. Roosevelt. And so the goals were to assure an adequate food supply, to keep food prices fair for farmers and consumers, and to protect and sustain our vital resources. So this was a response to both the economic crisis of the Great Depression, but also the environmental crisis of the Dust Bowl. So much like today, in the 1930s, there was some environmental and economic issues relating to food that this bill was looking to help kind of tackle. And we still have that now. So obviously, like I just said, the Farm Bill hasn't changed a ton. The thing that's changed more is what drives the Farm Bill. So if we think of the Farm Bill as a train, I know this is a little silly, but it'll make sense. There's kind of 2.5 powerful engines up front. So the first powerful engine is the commodity engine. So since the 1930s, commodities has been a huge part of the Farm Bill. This is programs that support growing different staple, non-perishable goods, and then generally storable commodities. So this is like corn and soybeans and rice, peanuts, beans, that kind of thing. And then we also include crop insurance in this engine. And so the other one is nutrition. Also, since the beginning, the nutrition title has grown a lot in the last 50 years and is currently the largest title, especially SNAP, which is previously known as food stamps. And so these 2 engines titles are seen as must pass. They're pretty bipartisan, at least historically they have been. And so we're able to utilize this bill that has these must pass pieces to get other legislation through, because otherwise it's this like whole rigmarole to get things passed. The kind of half engine I mentioned is conservation. So again, conservation was one of the roots of why the Farm Bill was initiated. It's still a huge deal today. Slow Food USA is very excited about the role that agriculture can play in conservation. But again, this one's a little bit more controversial. And so it's not seen as like a full engine, although it is something that a lot of folks are really excited about. So to complete this metaphor, the individual train cars then act again as kind of the different titles being pulled along, and then the miscellaneous title would be ARCBOOS. And so the agriculture committees in both the House and the Senate are able to, rather than separate out all these different subjects, pass one bill, flesh out all the information in them, and then pass it all at once. And it just makes it a lot easier for us to get things that we're excited about through. So again, the Farm Bill is a huge piece of legislation and there's a lot in it, but essentially it sets the rules of the road for our nation's food and farm system. It is the principal federal legislation that creates and modifies farm, food, nutrition, and rural development programs. So it determines what's grown by incentivizing the production of some crops like corn and soybeans over others like fruits and vegetables. It determines who grows it by determining who has capital, who has access to land, management tools. It determines how it's grown or produced by supporting programs that reward some production systems over others. What's done with those products when and where they're sold by helping farmers process, adding value to their crops, creating new market opportunities. It determines who can access and afford these goods. Again, nutrition programs like SNAP and programs that support farmers markets and other food retail outlets. And it also determines how we invest in our rural communities. There's an entire rural development title, and this covers things such as rural broadband, healthcare, community facilities, energy production, and more. And I do live in a rural area, and often when my Wi-Fi goes out, I think about this title. So again, the Farm Bill has a ton of power, and we think of so many things as inevitable within our food system, but they are that way for a reason, and that means that we can change them too. So the Farm Bill is usually considered by Congress every 5 years. I say usually because it often is not passed within that 5-year span. But that does mean that every 5 years, Congress has the opportunity to create new programs, modify the existing ones, maybe finish programs that are not really relevant anymore. And I can't stress enough how few bills receive this type of regular scrutiny. The Child Nutrition Reauthorization and the National Defense Authorization Act are really the only other two on this level. So kind of indicates what a big deal it is if it's up there with the military. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I think that a lot of y'all probably know more than you think about how bills get passed. But essentially, the point is that the Farm Bill is like any other bill in that it gets written in both the House and the Senate. It gets voted on. Leaders kind of take it back, vote on it, continue to work on it, and then it has to get sent to the president's office. And if you have any more questions about that process, I recommend a Schoolhouse Rock video that explains it very well. But some more insight to how the Farm Bill in particular in Ohio is written is that the House Agriculture Committee and the Senate Committee on Agriculture both kind of write drafts, and they get to decide which marker bills get in, and that's where these bills are introduced. And so currently the House Agriculture Committee is chaired by Representative Glenn Thompson of Pennsylvania. And so since the Republicans have control of the House, the chair is a Republican representative, and then the same thing in the Senate. So Debbie Stabenow is the representative, the chair in the Senate. And in Ohio, you all have a senator on the Ag Committee, and that gives you a ton of power because he is able to be in the room where it happens. Now, that doesn't mean that your other representatives don't have a say. In fact, sometimes it's really powerful to have a representative that's not on the Ag Committee sign on to a specific marker bill because it just shows how crucial it is. But it's also really nice to have a representative that is able to be in the room where these conversations are happening. And Senator Brown has expressed before how passionate he is about supporting small farmers. His like website, his second like campaign issue is agriculture expansion and supporting rural communities and investing in local farms. So this is someone that is an ally, hopefully, and yeah, that you all have the right to connect with as his representative or his constituents. And again, he's a senator, which is just nice because that means that folks from across the state can meet with him all at once and you get a lot of people power. So there is a lot of legislation in the Farm Bill. Again, we're not going to be able to go over all of it, but almost all of it is authorizing language. And so this means that it contains text that creates or modifies a program. Sometimes the language is really specific, but often it kind of gets glossed over, and that has to be sorted out later at the USDA. And so this is one of those areas where we can kind of use our racial equity lens. And when we are looking at how bills are worded or what kind of funding they're getting, we can try and ensure that the bills that are going to support marginalized farmers are getting these specifics and they're getting mandatory funding. What's mandatory funding? So I'm jumping ahead of myself, sorry. So the Farm Bill also determines how programs work, their funding, whether or not they are a grant program, whether the grants need matching funds, anything like that can be fleshed out in the Farm Bill legislation. Oops. And so the last thing I'll say about the authorizing language is the difference between mandatory and discretionary funding. So mandatory is exactly what it sounds like. It means that that funding is guaranteed every year. It doesn't have to go through the congressional budget and appropriation process. Discretionary funding does. So there are programs that have been passed, they're put into law, they're in the Farm Bill, but they never actually take off because the discretionary funding never gets approved by the appropriations committees. So again, we want to make sure that programs that are going to support marginalized farmers, programs that we're really excited about, can get mandatory funding if possible. They can also determine, the language can also determine eligibility criteria. So for example, if there's a program for new and beginning farmers, that's going to be put into this section. It can also determine the maximum amount of money that can be awarded, the length of a grant. And again, some programs require matching funds, which historically is something that smaller farmers aren't really able to benefit from because they can't match those funds. So yeah, just constantly with this authorizing language, trying to prevent any loopholes. So like Amanda said, there are 12 titles in the Farm Bill. You could have a 2-hour training on each one and still not know everything that there is to know. And so I'm not going to go into them all too much, but I will say that there are really crucial marker bills in every one. And obviously some are more directly related to the work we're all doing around food security, but there's just a lot of really crucial things that kind of get hidden in. So it's important to follow as much as you can. So there's some things that are not in the Farm Bill that are directly related to agriculture, really seem like they fall under this umbrella, but because they fall outside of the jurisdiction of agriculture committees, they are not in the Farm Bill. And so one that I think about a lot is farm workers' rights. It's something that obviously is hugely linked to farming, but unfortunately that is under the House Education and Labor Committee and the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. So there's no legislation in the Farm Bill about that. And then these are some other examples like regulations of GMOs, dietary guidelines, pretty much anything FDA is typically not in the Farm Bill. EPA things as well, like clean water, clean air is, not in the Farm Bill. So a lot of things too, school meals, all that kind of stuff. WIC is not in the Farm Bill, which a lot of people get confused about because SNAP is, and they are so similar. But yeah, that is why. So now that you know what the Farm Bill is, generally, this is kind of how the layout of the funding looks. So when I said nutrition is an engine, I meant it. So obviously nutrition takes up about 75% of the Farm Bill's funding. The non-nutrition funding is split up through commodities and crop insurance, which again, we kind of combine to be one engine. conservation programs, and then everything else is that tiny like neon blue sliver. I tried to make it super neon so that it was clear what it is because it is so tiny, and it's only about 3% of the spending. So this includes everything from research, programs like the local agriculture market program that Amanda touched on, the value added producer grants, farmers market, local promotion programs. So there's a lot of stuff that is super key that is in that tiny sliver. And the Farm Bill is a huge piece of legislation again, and it's a lot of money. So it still is a good chunk of change that's going to those programs. But when we look at what is being funded, it is largely the nutrition title. And so it's no hint needed that the largest Farm Bill title by dollar amount is nutrition. So I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about the nutrition title. There are so many marker bills within this title that we won't get to talk about tonight, but in general, the main program in the nutrition title is SNAP, or the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which formerly is known as food stamps. This is when a recipient receives a monthly food allowance on their EBT card. For most recipients, SNAP's supplements a family's food budget, but for 4 in 10 households, so about 40% of folks that receive SNAP, it's the only way for them to buy groceries. So luckily last year, the USDA modernized their thrifty food plan, and basically this changed the amount that was allocated per person per day from about $1.20 to about $5.45, which is still very little amount to be surviving on if that's your only source of funding to buy your groceries. But obviously it is much better than $1.20, because that, yeah, I've been to a grocery store lately, so and this lifted about 2.4 million SNAP participants, including over 1 million children above the poverty line. And this is something that has raised a little bit of controversy. There are some folks in Congress that are not excited about the thrifty food plan being modernized because they don't want all this funding going to SNAP. But yeah, it's a super important program that, like I just said, lifts people out of poverty, and for so many folks is the only way they're able to eat. So I'm pro eating. There are 2 other main programs that are funded in the nutrition title. The first one is the Emergency Food Assistance Program, or TFAP. And basically this is a means-tested federal nutrition program that purchases and distributes food to low-income Americans through emergency food providers like food banks, and they're anyone in partnership with the USDA. And TFAP helps food banks augment the other food they provide to families. It provides around 600 million meals of the 4 billion meals distributed by the Feeding America's network yearly, approximately. And then the other one is the Commodity Supplemental Food Program, which again is a means-tested program for low-income seniors. So this is for anyone 60 or older and provides nutritious foods. During the pandemic, this was like a big thing that I saw kind of on Instagram and stuff around these food boxes, and this is what was funding them. So that's the nutrition title. Again, very glossed over. It's a huge title, as you saw, but it is the biggest one in terms of dollar amount. All right, so shifting a little, I keep saying marker bills, and if you don't know what that means, it's totally fine, because I didn't know what it meant until this Farm Bill cycle. But marker bills are basically bills that are not meant to be passed on their own. They're meant to be incorporated into other legislation. And so the Farm Bill has a ton of marker bills. As we said, it's essentially all authorizing language. And the goal is basically to influence the bill. Some are really just to kind of force the pendulum one way or the other, but a lot of them are kind of word for word put into the bill itself. And they're really the most effective way to introduce a new idea or improve an existing program. And marker bills are pretty much all introduced. Many of them are being reintroduced in the new Congress, and there are some that are like kind of being worked out now, but basically the committees like to hear advice and insight from farmers and food advocates and their constituents like you all. So this is a really great way for folks to be involved. It's uncommon, I think, for someone to say, I support the Farm Bill, you should pass that. Your representative's probably going to be like, okay, that sounds good. But if you can ask them to sign on to a specific marker bill, that's a really great way to have your voice heard. So I'm going to talk about two marker bills, one that focuses on kind of the environmental farming side and one that focuses on SNAP expansion. There are a ton of marker bills. Again, I'm happy to kind of name some other ones if folks are interested, but first, I'll talk briefly about the Agricultural Resiliency Act, which was introduced by Representative Shelley Pinegreen, who is the only organic farmer currently in Congress. She is a representative of Maine, and the goal is basically to have net zero greenhouse gas emissions through agriculture by 2040. And so there's kind of 6 policy areas where this would happen. So the first is agriculture research. This increases funding for the USDA's regional climate hubs and invests in public breed and cultivator research. The next is soil health. It would authorize the USDA to offer performance-based crop insurance discounts. And so basically crop insurance right now is heavily based on what you grow, but this would allow the USDA to give discounts if you're using soil healthy practices. And it would also create a new USDA grant to state and tribal governments to improve soil health. Next is farmland preservation. It would create a new local agriculture marketing program, or LAMP subgroup, to help farmers develop and expand farmers markets. And it would increase funding for the agriculture conservation easement program. And that is what it sounds like. The goal is to preserve as much farmland as we can. Next, pasture-based livestock management. It would create a grant to support small-scale meat, poultry processing infrastructure. This is a huge problem during the pandemic. So many processing plants got shut down and backed up, and farmers I've talked to said that pre-pandemic, they had to make appointments to get their animals processed about 3 months before it needed to be done. And now it's about a year, if not more. So folks are having to make appointments to process their animals that haven't even been born yet. And so this is a huge area of growth, and also it's good for local economies to have local processing. The 5th is on-farm renewable energy. This would increase funding for the USDA's Rural Energy for America program and direct USDA to research dual-use energy systems that integrate renewable energy production with crop or animal production. And finally, food waste initiatives. So this would standardize the food date labeling. There's so much consumer confusion. I have myself been confused. What's the difference between buy and best buy and all the other food labels? So right now there is no standardizing, but this would provide a standardizing. And it would also create a new USDA program to reduce food waste in schools. So that is a broad overview of the Agricultural Resiliency Act. Again, the Farm Bill essentially has a ton of these bills that could be their own bill. So it is really intense to kind of try and explain all at once, but that's also the magic of the Farm Bill. And so the other bill I'm going to talk about really quick is the Closing the Meal Gap Act. This bill was introduced by Senator Christian Gillibrand, who's from New York, and it would increase the baseline SNAP benefits, expand SNAP benefits to territories. Currently, some territories do receive SNAP, but most US territories have something called NAP, which is a block grant. So for example, during the pandemic, many states saw the people eligible for SNAP expand, right? Because people lost their jobs, people needed more food access. And SNAP, because it is not a block grant, is able to expand. So as many people are eligible, are able to receive it. But a block grant basically means each territory gets X amount of money per year, and that's what they have. So they either have to lower their eligibility or they give folks less money. And so this would make that a lot more accessible. And this also would eliminate eligibility limits and unrealistic barriers. So for example, using the low cost food plan as the basis for calculating the SNAP formula, which would increase the baseline benefits by approximately 30%. It would permanently authorize the standard medical deduction in every state for senior and disabled individuals applying for SNAP. So right now, you might receive SNAP, but you can receive as low as like $19 a month, which again, just like isn't really doing much. And so this would give the baseline for seniors and disabled individuals of $140 a month. It would also eliminate the cap on the excessive shelter deduction in the SNAP formula for all households. It would eliminate the time limits on benefits, and it would create a path to transition those who live and work in US territories to SNAP. So again, there are quite a few bills around SNAP expansion. This one I'm particularly excited about because it just does a really good job of kind of tackling the areas where SNAP is lacking. But again, it's like a lot of stuff to deal with. So, excuse me. I think we're going to kind of flesh out more what y'all can do. Just attending this session is a great start because it's really important for us to be able to hear y'all's feedback. But it's a lot easier than you'd think to get connected to your representatives, at least I hope. They're on social media and email and phone call, and they typically want to hear from you because they work for you. And so when you call and say, I really like this marker bill, I'd like you to sign on to it, that's something that it really only takes like 20 people to do for them to actually take notice and take some time out of their day to look into it. Staying in touch with your Slow Food chapter or also your wonderful Food Policy Council is great because, again, I love the Farm Bill and I'm excited, but I am not in y'all's area, and it's just really awesome to see how these big federal programs can actually impact the community. You all can also host a listening session yourself, or if you are attending this and you're thinking that there's some people who you need their voice heard by their reps, pull them in and let us know, and we're happy to work with them. And I'll also say that if you are interested in doing some story banking with Slow Food USA and kind of explaining more how you are impacted by the Farm Bill, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. And again, maybe connect with other folks in your area and schedule a meeting with your representative as a unit or their ag staffer, because it doesn't take a ton of people to make someone really rethink their thoughts on a policy. And again, you have a really awesome senator on the ag committee, but if there's someone that isn't willing to sign on, even just convincing them not to argue against signing on can be really really powerful. So I'm going to stop talking and leave some time for questions, but also if y'all have questions for Mark Anthony or Maddie or Amanda to kind of speak on any of the ways that you all can get involved, that is great too. Yeah, Mark Anthony, go ahead.
Yes, I guess before people start asking me or anyone on the board questions, I guess, what are the sorts of things that other Slow Food chapters are doing? And should someone come to us to ask for help or assistance or whatever, what are the typical things that we should expect? And I'll frame this in terms of, like many other Slow Food chapters, all Slow Food chapters, we're all volunteer based. Many of us are not necessarily as ingrained in the food bill. So what is it that we can be doing here on the ground?
I think meeting with your legislator is huge, and you don't have to be an expert. And honestly, they're sick of hearing from experts. They see professional lobbyists all day, every day. And I think just taking the time and meeting with them and saying like, I don't know XYZ, but what I do know is I'm a SNAP recipient and this is a problem, or I'm a small farmer and this would be really beneficial to me, carries a lot of weight. And I can't stress enough how much these ag staffers and senators are just meeting with suits all day, who are shoving statistics in their face, and it's really powerful for them to be able to hear from their constituents. And that can look a lot of different ways too. So like, if I know, shout out, Slow Food Columbus is hosting an event later this month. It can be incorporated into that even as a letter writing campaign, or just getting folks excited about the Farm Bill, linking it to what you're doing in other places. It's so expansive that even if you are doing an event around sustainable farming, you can highlight one specific part of the Farm Bill and try and get folks excited about that and engaged.
And I guess kind of as a follow-up then, I guess, is the typical path, is it we are worried that we're not going to get funding, so we need to be advocating for XYZ, or are we trying to protect ourselves and we don't want ABC to happen instead? Like, how does that typically work in terms of what's being suggested versus like, what do we need to be studying in order to, I guess, to lobby against something?
I guess it depends on what you're advocating around. I think in my experience, positive is always better. So like supporting something rather than advocating against something. And Amanda and Maddie and Brian, feel free to chime in. But I think just being able to say, this is my experience, and naming either a marker bill or something else in the Farm Bill that is like very explicit is really powerful. I don't know if that answers your question.
And another thing to support what Brett was saying was, another thing is, if you happen to know what your representative cares about. So for example, even if they're not on the agriculture committee, but you are trying to encourage them to support particular marker bills or pieces of legislation within the Farm Bill, if you know that they care about the women and infant and child nutrition program, right? That care can kind of extend to potentially SNAP and other nutrition incentives actually covered by the Farm Bill. Or, you know, if you have a representative who cares about military veterans, certain programs that benefit underserved producers and particularly farmers can also serve military veterans, right? If they decide to go into the agriculture system as producers. So, you know, knowing your audience and knowing what your representative or senator cares about and connecting it to the Farm Bill, even if they're not on the ag committees, can be really powerful as well.
Yeah, thank you for naming that, Amanda. That's so poignant and true. And again, like the more specific, the better, I think. So yeah, it is hard because the reality is that there are some representatives that want to separate the nutrition title altogether, which would make it harder to pass. And so we do want to be advocating to keep it together. So that is kind of like what you were saying, Mark Anthony would be saying, we want this, don't defund it. But I do also think it's really, it's almost easier to say, we want this thing and here's all these people that also want it and we're your constituents. And if you give it to us, we'll be happy. So yeah, I guess both basically.
Yeah, well, I mean, thank you for sharing that. I think it's just one of those things where we know that, or I understand at least that the Farm Bill is so big. It's almost, if we were to look at it, you know, do a deep dive, maybe there's pieces that we recognize would be not socially just. Like, would it be worth it to be spending the time to, or maybe the Farm Bill is only comprised of things that are positive for different people. I'm not entirely sure, but it's just one of those questions. Like, how fine grained do we need to catch that if this passes, this whole slew of other things that we all didn't see was going to pass with it too, right?
Yep. Yeah. And actually Cory Booker just introduced the Industrial Agriculture Accountability Act, I think it's called, which is again kind of like a way to look at it from the other side of like passing something that would be a little providing some regulations. But yeah, you're right. There's definitely, I mean, a lot of these programs that have resulted in our soil erosion, like the encouragement of growing, of monocropping and all these things are in the Farm Bill. And so I think that's a good point. But yeah, we can only do so much. And I like Rick, your question is great. You asked are there any limitations on what we can do institutionally as slow food chapters as distinct from individual citizens? I might tag Brian in to answer that one if that's okay.
Yeah, hey everybody. I didn't introduce myself, I don't think. I'm Brian Solom. I'm with Slow Food USA. I work with Brett. I'm our communications director. Yeah, it seems like the IRS keeps the lines around nonprofits doing federal level advocacy work very blurry, which is maybe a tendency of the IRS overall. I don't know. We follow the guidance around what's called the insubstantial part test, which is to say, as a 501c3, we, and by extension, slow food chapters, are not allowed to make lobbying a substantial part of the work that we do. Now, of course, they don't define what substantial means. We tend to look at a 5 to 10% threshold of work that Slow Food USA does around advocacy as a way of just being protective and a little bit overly cautious. But yeah, I think, you know, I can maybe in the email that follows this presentation, we can send some resources around, you know, it's important to never engage in partisan lobbying. We need to be issues-based as nonprofits rather than political party-based. We can't provide endorsements. We can only like provide comment on elected officials and active legislation. So yeah, in general, we're here to help you think through what it looks like to be a little bit more advocacy minded in your efforts. And we'd love to brainstorm that with you and maybe even bring in other chapters and their experiences as well.
Thank you. Does that answer the question, Rick?
Yeah, I have lots of other questions, but yeah.
Cool. Well, I'm glad. Yeah, I just want to, Lavanya asked, is there specific language around beginning farmers in the Farm Bill? Yes, there is a ton. The Beginning Farmer and Rancher Opportunity Act, the Next Generation in Agriculture Act, and the Assist Socially Disadvantaged and Veteran Farmers and Ranchers Act. Whew, some of these are like mouthfuls, are all bills that would support beginner farmers and ranchers. Our farmers are aging rapidly. We really, really need to invest in beginning and young farmers because we're not going to have any more food if all our farmers age out. So yes, and again, this is something that the language can be really specific around, or it can be extremely unspecific on purpose. And so we want to ensure that yeah, those kind of nuances are put in there. And again, like that's a great example of something that if you are someone that's a beginner farmer and there you have a network of those folks, like you all can kind of decide what bill is would be the most helpful to you as individuals and use that as your advocacy tool, because at the end of the day, that you're who the bill is meant to help. And I can sorry, I said them very quickly, so I will type them into the chat. And Rosie said, support kids. Yes, agree. Every politician loves to support kids. And again, school meals and child nutrition reauthorization is separate, although sometimes my brain does cross them. But we know SNAP expansion supports kids getting healthier food. We know that there are a lot of impacts, even if they're not directly impacted by the Farm Bill. I'll also say that SNAP education is part of the Farm Bill. And so that is any program like public dietitians that go into schools and do programming. School gardens can be funded through SNAP education. So there is some overlap there that if that's an issue area that you're excited about, there is some funding opportunity there. Oh, and then Rosie also said the largest farms with sales over $1 million operates over 25% of farmland, but number of farms haven't really changed. Need to invest to level the playing field for small farms. Yeah, this is huge. I'm trying to think. I mean, Agricultural Resiliency Act does have some farmland conservation, which would support smaller farms. And I need to look, nothing is coming to mind right now, but I know that there are some that are, yeah, supporting smaller farms and ensuring that land is used to, I guess that part of the Agricultural Resiliency Act is the only thing that comes to mind, which basically there is a USDA program that conserves farmland and you can only access it if you're going to farm regeneratively and sustainably. I don't know if anyone else has other thoughts on that.
There's a couple other that don't directly like particularly answer your question, Rosie. But you know, there's some other things like there's the introduction of the student loan forgiveness for farmers and ranchers, which kind of help level playing field for beginning farmers, which historically are usually smaller farmers and medium-sized farmers, because they haven't had the time to grow their grow their farm. I think, you know, any sort of any sort of marker bill or advocacy around certain programs like the 2501 and the 1890 centers of excellence, which tend to support beginning farmers, which again are usually the smaller farmers. So usually advocacy around beginning farmers and small farms tend to go hand in hand. So even anything that Brett listed related to newer farmer bills are also opportunities to address some of your the point that you brought up, Rosie.
Yeah, and Maddie flagged that the local agriculture marketing programs, or LAMP, often support small and mid-sized farmers. Yeah, and I love that you phrase it that way, Amanda. Like these things are all interconnected, and for like when we talk about SNAP expansion, we can also think about double bucks programs, and that supports farmers markets, and that supports small farmers, and so yeah, like there's so many little pockets that I can get stuck in, and at the end of the day, they are all really linked, and we can't have a just food system with just one piece of the puzzle. So basically that's a good thing. Any advocacy is great because it's all connected. Rick, you said you had other questions. Was it specifically about the slow food limitations or other Farm Bill?
Well, no, I mean, it seems to me that there are two questions sort of circling here. One is the specific advocacy of writing to Sherrod Brown or whoever our representatives are, which you know, is a good thing. But the second one has to do with our slow food chapter being able to use our advocacy as a visibility tool and getting out there. And for that, you know, having a sense, a more specific sense of the sorts of things that would appeal to people at farmers markets, the sorts of things that would appeal to smaller beginning farmers, the sorts of things that would appeal to, you know, processing. Having those broken out in a bit more detail would I think be really helpful, because, you know, there are different constituencies that we could approach and, you know, sort of offer ourselves as organizing activity around this, as opposed to, you know, hey, the Farm Bill is here, you know, right, and tell Sherrod Brown to support the Farm Bill, which he will anyway.
I totally agree.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, for instance, I'm at you know, the Ohio State University, and folks in our ag school would certainly be supportive of funding for agricultural research that's in the resiliency bill. So if we could kind of put that out there, and that would give us a reason to be visible on the ag campus in a way that you know, just general support for the Farm Bill might not.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think you said it perfectly. It's so helpful to know your audience, and like Amanda and Maddie were saying, that it's super helpful in terms of your representative. And I think you bring up a good point. It's also helpful in terms of who you're engaging. And so, oh yeah, awesome. Amanda, do you want to speak to that about some of the other resources that y'all have put out?
Yeah, so I was actually really curious. I created this spreadsheet because I was really curious about what marker bills existed. Obviously, you know, organizations like Slow Food USA and you can't tackle everything, right? You can't. Right. You have to kind of put your effort behind one or a few particular high priority. And we see the Food Policy Council as an education rather than like as an education opportunity. So I wanted to know more personally about what marker bills are out there, and who sent them out, who submitted them, what they were about. So I created this spreadsheet that's kind of a living document. It's definitely not exhaustive, but I hope it's extensive at the very least, that provides some perspective on what marker bills are out there. So if you really value rural development, you can focus on rural development, right? If you really value conservation or nutrition or whatever, like, you know what marker bills are out there in order to have the tools to advocate, right? And so yeah, so we're going to be posting, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, a blog post that's specific on nutrition marker bills, because again, you can't do everything at once. So we kind of focused on non-nutrition marker bills, but the spreadsheet that's embedded is a living document. So that's one of the resources. So anyway, yeah.
Amanda, yeah, this is incredible. And yeah, I'm also going to share, NSAC has a similar tool that I use all the time when I'm like, wait, what's that bill I'm thinking of? Or also, I don't even know if this exists. So thankfully, we don't have to reinvent the wheel, because there's already amazing organizations and folks like Amanda doing the hard work for us. So, and I think Brian also articulated really well in the chat that there's tons of strength in partnerships. So like you said, Rick, connecting with folks at the ag school that you're involved with is a great place to start. And yeah, anyone have any other questions about Farm Bill? And if not, I think we'll kind of change gears, and I guess we want to hear from you all about things. We kind of already started this, but like, it can be as specific or broad as you want, but what are the things initially, now that you know, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see y'all, what things do you want represented in the Farm Bill? What's important to you? Oh, and real quick, sorry, while you all think about that big ask, I love Rosie's question, inviting folks, a legislator, to visit a farmer's market. And I will just say, I'm in North Carolina and work with a group much like the Food Policy Council to do organizing around federal policy. And we love bringing legislators to farms and food hubs and farmers markets, and they love coming. And so that's a really good way to show this is what the program that you're going to vote on does. And this is why we need not only to continue funding, but more funding and more programs like this. And so historically, when I have done that, and I'm happy, I'll put my email in the chat to connect with you more. But I think having folks there that are ready to speak and prepped is always really great, because it can be very frustrating to talk to a representative, even if they're working for us. But at the same time, I personally do get a little starstruck sometimes. And so just making sure that, I love that Amanda named that, highlighting and spotlighting programs that are going to support that farmers market. Having different farmers speak is also really awesome. Representatives love to talk to farmers, and yeah, I'm happy to connect more offline. But yeah, any other thoughts or thoughts about what they want to see in the Farm Bill? Oh, great question, Rick. So the Farm Bill will be voted on in theory in late September. I guess I'll just say it's kind of the DC grapevine is thinking that there will not be a Farm Bill voted on this year successfully. That doesn't mean there won't be one, but that is also kind of historically the case, especially when there is not a unified Congress. But that just gives us more time to advocate. So I guess timeline, most marker bills have been introduced. The Congress sitting now is the Congress that's going to vote on the Farm Bill. And that will be in like early October, late September. But when we will have our next Farm Bill is a lot more question marks. Oh, thank you, Brian, for putting that in the chat. That's an awesome resource. But yeah, and it can be, again, as broad or as specific as folks want. But are there things that you all are excited about seeing in the Farm Bill?
Brett, I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about, I think at the beginning, if I maybe I'm misremembering the phrasing, but like that social justice equity piece. I think I'd be looking forward to seeing that in the Farm Bill, in terms of actual distribution of resources. And you talked about beginning farmers, but historically disadvantaged populations and that sort of thing. What sorts of things could we be bringing attention to actually see those through at the end?
Yeah, I mean, there are some bills that are looking to expand programs and make them more accessible. So like the two I highlighted are both programs that I think would lead to a more just food system. Cory Booker just introduced the Justice for Black Farmers Act, which obviously is like very explicitly supporting the racial justice initiatives. And so that's like a more clear-cut one. There's also, I mean, again, the I think of the territories as that's a huge social justice issue. And so giving access to the territories, giving them access to SNAP would be a huge bonus. But I mean, again, it's hard because it's great that it's such a big bill because so many things can be passed all at once, but it's hard because it's difficult to kind of take those pieces and make sure that they're in there. But even if there's a bill that you're really excited about that Sherrod Brown has signed on to, you can meet with him still and say, we really want to make sure this gets mandatory funding. We really want to make sure that this is only accessible to marginalized farmers, this grant. So yeah, kind of getting into the weeds can be really helpful. Thank you so much for coming. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm really excited by this conversation. Like, I think there's some really great questions and discussion and just like learning about what other folks, what's piquing all of our interests, as well as like some of the process questions about like, when should we be doing this? You know, how do we frame it? Which is, you know, Brett, you addressed a lot of those questions really helpfully and well, but also like it's just kind of a good reminder for me, because in talking about planning for this session, you know, we didn't include that information on a slide, but like, hey, that's actually pretty important. So it's a good reminder that sometimes the basics of like who, what, where, when, how, why is really essential when we're planning and mobilizing, you know, coalitions. So that was a really helpful reminder for me that always make sure to address that. Key.
Hi, Mona Jenkins with Queen Mother's Market Cooperative in Cincinnati. Thanks for hosting this. I've been holding a few information sessions regarding the bill with folks in Walnut Hills, primarily because I got involved along with the National Black Food Justice Alliance, who has been drafting up some things. And so we drafted that justice for Black farmers that Cory Booker is supporting. So again, local level, we don't know, but it affects a lot of us. And so I think this is just a reminder that, yes, we do need to make sure folks know that this is a very critical bill that we need to try to get more information about so that we can contact our representatives to represent us.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, our representatives represent us.
And I think like Brett mentioned and Mona provided is that they like, if 15 people who are their constituents within their region are saying similar things or calling for similar things, it can make a difference, you know? So like being like the amount of people saying the same thing does matter. And so your individual voice will be formed into a collective, right? So like, even if you're talking to a representative or senator who's not on the ag committee, they're a part of the voting and decision-making process. So though they might not be in the room during hearings and like the drafting period, they can help dictate what happens after the draft comes into the chamber, right? And so you have like, you can be as persistent as try to be as persistent as you can, because this is such a big piece of legislation that affects so much. Like everybody eats, everybody needs to eat, and so, and we want to create a system that is focused on equity, that's focused on strengthening. And you know, a lot of the food that that is labeled as specialty crops, majority of that is the food we eat every day, are the vegetables and fruit we eat every day. So it impacts everyone. And if you can find an avenue that you care about, bring it up, say it over and over again, and be as persistent as you can be, especially through the lens of like equity and making sure that your voice is actually heard and it isn't just a big experts or lobbyists. Don't just leave it to them. be a part of that kind of system.
Totally. I'm retweeting that. Yeah, any other, and again, it can be like for me, when I think of the Farm Bill, I'm like, I want SNAP in that. I want to make sure that people have food. Or it can be as specific as a program that you've heard of, or even broader than that. I mean, yeah, are there things that are coming to folks' minds as things that they're excited about in the Farm Bill? I think probably folks are excited about dinner time coming up. Oh, sorry, Mona, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, for me, it's about supporting local infrastructure and connecting those regenerative farmers to the system. I think we saw with the pandemic, there was a serious collapse, and there was a significant emphasis on the need on a more local and regional system. Not only for the fact of food itself, but it's healthier. And a lot of our communities that suffered the most during the pandemic were Black and brown communities that already didn't have access to food. So making sure that those structures are set up even during difficult times, I think is going to be critical. Especially when so many of those are receiving the SNAP benefits and relying on some of the other nutrition programs.
Totally. Thank you.
So I also had a question again about a different part I'm excited about, and in that I'm looking. I took a screenshot of the distribution of the bill and the cost and everything, and on here I think I'm most excited about that other 1% of the miscellaneous, the otherness, the research, that food education piece, and with it being only that 1%, is that a sliver that we need to be worried about won't actually get passed? Like, as we're focusing on the rest of it, how much concern should be devoting time away, to other pieces, if more or less these pieces get through, if that makes sense.
I think it does. I mean, I would not be, those titles are not going to leave the Farm Bill, I would say. And a lot of representatives are, I think, actually more willing to pass things that they're not necessarily aligned with in those titles because it's smaller. So that's actually a lot of where the work can be done, because it's almost not newsworthy, because it's such a smaller chunk. Yeah, but I wouldn't be concerned about it not passing, but it is a really good place to do some advocacy. I mean, like trade, just like saying trade is kind of boring, but the trade title basically covers food export subsidy programs and international food aid programs, which are huge. And also, I know we keep referencing back to the pandemic, but trade was a huge thing going on during the pandemic, and our food systems were complete, so anyway, yes, I guess that is a really great place to do advocacy. And also all the research is in that title, and like Amanda said, all the programs supporting specialty crops, which is the stuff we eat every day, that is also in that kind of small sliver. Title 10, horticulture. Woo. And I'm gonna put my email in the chat, and I think we also will follow up in the near future with y'all, because we have your emails about other ways to get involved and just stay in touch too, because as things like you all said, the Farm Bill advocacy is a long journey, and so things are going to keep coming up that we need to work together on, and it's really nice to do it in community with other folks that are excited about a more just food system. But thank you all so much for coming out on a Tuesday evening. And yeah, any last questions or thoughts? I just want to shout out again, and I actually think she might have snuck on. Cynthia was a huge help in getting this together, and you weren't here when we were singing your praises earlier, so I'll shout you out now. But then, yeah, also the Cincinnati Regional Food Policy Council and the Columbus Slow Food Chapter are incredible, incredible resources and have so much information and insight. And Mark Anthony, do you want to talk about your event happening later this month?
Sure. Actually, Brandy would be a better spokesperson for that. She and I think Russ on our board is going to be leading a discussion on breeding sweetgrass on April 13th. Brandy, do you want to say anything more about it?
Yeah, we are trying to cultivate a book club where we read a variety of texts. And so we're starting with Braiding Sweetgrass next week, since that was the 2021 Slow Food USA Book of the Year. And so we're really excited. We've had a couple of different people who are interested. And so we're going to try to use this as an opportunity to, read a variety of different things and have more discussions about our food systems and social justice.
I'm going to stop recording.